Welcome to Bible Health Secrets. I'm your host, Jonathan Otto. In this episode, we're going to be looking at answering Alzheimer's. We're also looking at the secret to living a long, high-quality life. We're also looking at biblical solutions to post-trauma, as well as mood disorder, including depression and anxiety. This is going to be a really exciting episode. Also, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of those of you that have chosen to support this mission by owning this series. Thank you for taking that move, because what that's done is that it allows us to keep going, getting this mission, this message out to the world in the way that we do, and disseminating this information far and wide for free makes a huge difference. And also getting that resource, being able to replay, watch episodes, share with your friends and family, watch the extended interviews from all the experts, over 40 excellent in-depth interviews, things that you're not able to see in this series because it's too much content, right? But having that in your library is such a valuable resource, and during this free screening, you can get it for a special price. So that's available just below. But let's dive into this episode. Let's have a look at how we can apply these biblical principles to our lives.
I think also what drove me into drugs and really harming myself, harming my body in that way, had everything to do with my past. And so everything was connected, and as I began to heal, and as I began to really seek God to heal me from my past, and I'm still seeking that, meaning there's so much trauma that I had as a child and through my teen years, and as an adult for that matter. I think trauma is a part of life, and if somebody says they've not had any trauma, I don't know what planet they're living on, to be honest with you. But anyway, so that as I began to, if you will, follow the fruit to the root, and that was just like something that came to me where I would just be asking, like, where are these thoughts coming from? Like, why do I have these issues with certain people? Why do I have these issues with money? Why do I have these fears? Where is this coming from? And so really it was more of a self-discovery of finding where these kinds of patterns were from, and what they provoked me into doing, decisions that I was making, or what it was keeping me from. And so as I found so much healing from that, pretty much every client that I've worked with, and that's thousands and thousands of people that I found, it was a very similar thing. You know, it wasn't like this is my bag of tricks and, you know, oh, you have this problem, it must be this is the answer. That wasn't at all. It was more of learning about people and learning about their journey. And then as I would do that, as I was working with different clients, I would see, you know, and I would say, well, why do you feel that way? And when was the first time you felt that way? And what was happening in your life at that time? I'm like, is this really the first time you're feeling afraid? Is this really the first time you're feeling afraid of making a mistake? Or is this been something consistent in your life? And they would say, wow, yeah, no, I guess it isn't just like right now. Okay, well, let's go back. I mean, when was the last time you felt that way? And then they would just keep journeying. I would keep asking those questions, and it would always go back to something when they were very small, very, very young, and these impressions that they had on their head from trauma or from an experience that they had that caused them to create this belief system. And then they act out that belief system for the rest of their lives. And it's almost like it's a pattern that gets repeated again. It's almost like a hamster in a wheel. I don't know if you've ever experienced a hamster in a wheel.
So ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, and the ACEs study started in the mid-1990s, and what the researchers were looking at is the correlation of emotional trauma in childhood and illness onset in adulthood. And really the study was phenomenal. It's one of the most underexposed studies done in medicine. And it really demonstrates that emotional trauma is one of the most underexposed epidemics that is underlying and is one of the root causes of chronic illness. So originally the study was done by the CDC in Kaiser Permanente, and they were looking at 17,500 adults. And the results were pretty staggering and stunning, and even the researchers were amazed by the results. So, for example, if you had a high level of ACEs, these adverse childhood events, you had an increased risk of 7 out of the top 10 causes of death. And 67% of all adults said they had had an adverse childhood event. And when we talk about ACEs, exactly what are we talking about? What are they? So the researchers defined 10 different types of ACEs, and they just chose things that they had seen in the research and that were commonly understood as emotional trauma. So it's things like physical and emotional neglect, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. It was things like incarceration of a family member, parents separating or divorce, mental illness in the family, substance abuse, things like that. So they came up with 10. And then the results showed that, for example, if you had 6 of those, you had a 20-year reduction in lifespan. If you had just 4 of those types of ACEs, you had over 400% increased risk of things like depression, Alzheimer's, mental illnesses. If you had just 2 ACEs, you had up to 100% increased risk of autoimmune diseases. So, and if you had a large number, like over 8 of ACEs, you had 3 times the risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of heart disease.
That's some staggering statistics right there. 400% increased risk for things like dementia, Alzheimer's, mental illness, 100% increase in the risk of autoimmune disease, 3 times the risk of lung cancer, 3.5 times the risk of heart disease, 6 times increase in risk of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. It's almost inconceivable how much your risk for many of the world's deadliest diseases increase due to an ACE, which is an adverse childhood experience. And it gets worse. Not only is there an increase in disease risk for people who have experienced an ACE themselves, but there's also compelling evidence to prove the risk also increases for those who have an ACE further back in their family tree, such as a parent or grandparent. Let's continue to see what else Danny and Nikki have to say about this.
I still cry when I tell my story. So, and largely I cry because of what God's walked me through, that it's not who I am today. It's not what my current existence is. And the fact is I should be dead. I should be dead. If you were to know the fullness of the story, anyone listening to the fullness of the story go, yeah, I would have sliced my wrists. Yeah, or you put yourself in places where you should just die, So I was definitely in harm's way multiple times, partially at the work of my parents and the other part at my own, what I did with my life and the places I took myself. So
a lot of people that are in your situation are a mental wreck because there's too many things that they're hearing that are so disturbing, but you have the power of God. I just want to commend you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please, tell me your story.
Well, and you're right. Most people are not in touch with their feelings even.
Yeah.
We live in a very disconnected society today, and people have ways of masking their emotions. And if they cannot get underneath those emotions, they can't be healed. And so most people just try to build a wall to hide it and to pretend like it's not there, but it's beneath the surface. And we're seeing it more today than ever. I mean, our society is so hostile. I have watched in the last 30 years, our culture completely change from they're doing pretty good emotionally 30 years ago to today. Like, I think the emotional maturity of our country right now is about 12 years old. Just the reactions are so heightened, they're huge, people are hostile. The amount of anger that is inside of our society today is terrible, which again is just proof that there is something lurching beneath the surface, and there's a wound, there's trauma there, there's unmet needs there, and unmet needs and trauma lend to anger and fits of rage and hostility and judgment and people excommunicating each other because of political views, which is just goes to show you what our maturity level is. So anyway.
So true.
Yes, it is, sadly.
So true.
So my story.
Yeah, please.
Okay, well, I grew up in a violently abusive, drug-infested home. And that was honestly as a result of my mom and my father meeting on a Friday night down in Los Angeles. She's 17, he was 24, and he was a foreigner. And bada boom, bada bing, here's me. It's pretty much how that went. It was a one-night stand, and then, he was threatened with statutory rape charges if he didn't marry my mom. The day before she turned 18, they actually got married. Hilarious. So they ended up married. Within 3 weeks, my mother and my grandmother kicked him out, and that was the end of it. And so she ended up as a single mom. However, my father, my biological father, still being married to her and supporting financially, but I did not know this. I actually just learned this recently. And so anyway, Mom just kind of went with the next guy that would take her, and that man was 6'10", 350 pounds, and he was as violent as his size. He was a very angry man. He too had a terrible, traumatic childhood where he watched some things that nobody should ever see. Not only that, but beaten badly himself. He was an athlete and had an offer from the Los Angeles Rams to play professional football, got injured. He got drafted right out of high school. He was 18 when he got drafted, and then got injured that very first season, never made it on the field. So talk about a dream and a hope of becoming something that then is just absolutely crushed with. I think is horrible, especially for a man. He then meets my mom shortly after that, and my mom came with this little Hispanic thing. And he... I think largely both of them were not ready to be parents, and so they were products of the 60s. They did every kind of drug you can imagine, and out of those drugs brought in irresponsibility. Where
that was a satanic culture too, wasn't it? Like, I mean,
very.
People don't realize that. It's like
they really
look
don't.
at it like the glory days, but it was all Crowleyan philosophy.
It's sorcery. It's straight up sorcery. What the Bible talks about sorcery is what that is, and so all of the debauchery that the Bible talks about, it happens in that environment. And so they were not married, actually. They didn't get married till I was 8 years old, even though I was lied to that my mom was a virgin on her wedding night with him. I did not know that I had a different dad than the two girls that I grew up with. Had no clue about any of that. And there was just a lot of violence. First of all, any little kid looks to their dad, whether his dad is 5'8" or 5'5", and sees him to be a giant. Well, this was literally like, he's nearly 7 feet tall and an enormous man who takes up half the couch, the only couch in the whole house, you know what I mean? So that was, there's a lot of fear. There's a tremendous amount of fear of being hurt, and I was also violated sexually from the time I was 3 until I was 16. Again, the drugs produced a environment where we weren't watched. I remember my very first memory actually that I've ever had is at 3 years old, and I'm playing in an alley. We lived in an apartment building, and this Hispanic man came and took me and brought me into his apartment and had his way with me. And it happened again with my cousin, and repeatedly with my cousin when I was 7, and he would have been a teenager, close to teenage years, maybe 13, 14, or 15, something like that. And right in my aunt's house. And then my dad picked up the molesting when I was 13. So that was infuriating. That was absolutely infuriating. My mom had just broken her neck, and there's a whole lot of trauma around that. She dove into a pool coming after me to play with. The trauma of being impoverished, being on welfare here, my parents fight about money, us not having food, my grandmother bringing groceries over, dinner sometimes being Wonder Bread and margarine with garlic salt. But they have their weed, they had their street drugs. They could always somehow have their pot and their pills, but couldn't provide for us.
There's also something else very important just to mention about ACEs. ACEs, emotional trauma especially, emotional trauma and neglect, are very hard to self-report. So, for example, if you ask somebody, were you emotionally traumatized in childhood or did you have emotional neglect? How can a child really know at that time how they should have been treated and how they should have interacted with their parents? So often that goes underreported because it requires some skill, and you need to go much deeper. When you just ask somebody that question, it's very superficial, and you're going to get a superficial, response. In fact, attachment trauma is what is most trauma in childhood is to do with trauma in relation to your caregivers. So when we talk about emotional trauma, a lot of people link that to PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's trauma in response to a specific discrete incident, so something specific that you can name, that you can remember. Whereas in actual fact, most trauma is relational, so it's an ambient type of trauma. It's not a single incident, but it's to do with not attaching properly with your caregivers. And there's some major research looking at mother-baby interactions. There was a study of over 6,000 mother-baby interactions, and a staggering 50% of all adults actually don't properly attach with mum. And this is also played out with the father relation as well. And it leads on to developmental trauma. And developmental trauma leads on to things like difficulty with self-regulation of emotions, anxiety, depression, difficulties, memory, concentration, focus, and also difficulty in relations in adulthood as well. And we tend to, in adulthood, how we attach in our main relationships in adulthood is often defined by how we related with our parents as well. So up to 50% of people don't fully attach properly, so that's really a huge part of it. And most people find that very difficult to self-report on being questioned, but it is actually part of what you could call emotional abuse, attachment and developmental trauma. So emotional trauma is passed down intergenerationally, and it's been shown that it gets passed both via the mother line and it can be passed down by the father line. So when, for example, a father may be emotionally traumatized, it changes the epigenetic expression of genes, and it actually affects the RNA expression of sperm. So they've done experiments in major journals where they would take sperm from traumatized male mice and they would inject it into the eggs of healthy, untraumatized females, and the progeny, the offspring of the mice, would have the same epigenetic expression as the traumatized father. So epigenetics explains why something that happens to us in our lifetime changes our epigenetic expression, and that actually is inherited by our children, which is it's a stunning understanding, but it's true, and it can pass down 7 generations. And there's research looking at certain mammals now where it's being passed down 12 generations.
This is revolutionary research that not many people are being exposed to. If ACEs have such a negative effect on health and can be passed down even up to 12 generations, that would mean that almost no one is immune to its effects. And no one is talking about this. Your doctor is likely not asking you about your childhood trauma in your life or in your family tree before he prescribes you drugs or deals with your autoimmune condition. Your surgeon isn't delving into the trauma of your life before operating on your heart to deal with your heart condition. People, including most medical professionals, just aren't aware of these staggering statistics. And that is why it's vitally important that you take charge of your own health and educate yourself on this important issue.
It's been over the last 5 years that we have seen patient after patient after patient who actually has devastation in their lives or devastation in their families, and who has done very well. And it's just hearing those stories again and again which has been so exciting. We had one guy who said that he has allowed himself to think about the future and to talk about the future with his grandchildren once again. He had actually stopped because he wouldn't talk to them about the future because he knew that he would not be part of it. And now he's allowed himself to do that. We had another woman who said that her husband is an excellent guitarist, and he had lost that ability, and that he now got the nuance in his guitar playing back again. Another woman who actually had lost her ability to play the piano, and that came back. A woman who lost her ability to speak a foreign language, which she had been very good at when she was young. She actually learned to speak both Chinese and Russian, and these started to come back as she improved. So the stories are just heartwarming and very exciting to hear. And of course, from the other parts of the family member, one girl said that her mother had become part of the family once again. So these are really exciting to hear.
I can tell you that, for me, when I was ravaged with, I had multiple chemical sensitivity. I was allergic to everything. I was covered with rashes and hives. I couldn't get out of a chair for a year. And with all that inflammation, it was eating out my brain. And I could not safely drive a car. I lost the ability to parallel park or back up. I could no longer do it. I couldn't sequence all the things happening to drive a car. I couldn't remember how to do things on a computer, and I'm pretty decent on a computer, and I could hardly dial a phone number. I mean, just trying to hold those numbers in my head, I would get confused and sometimes have to dial several times. And for me, what happened is I, healed what was going on in my body, then, various factors, my brain came back online. And I remember the day that I could hold the phone number in my head, the 7 digits, and dial the phone number again. And that was like a miracle.
I mean, I'd be drooling in a nursing home by now if I hadn't have learned functional medicine and done everything I did. I was in my early 50s when I was ill in that way, and when I treat people with dementia in their early 50s, it goes very quickly.
When did you start seeing the problem there with your mother?
Quite quickly after she got out of the hospital. She knew what was going on. It wasn't like it wasn't from like an outside looking in. She realized that she was having some memory problems as well, and we would have conversations, and then about 3 hours later she'd forget what I had talked to her about, which can be heartbreaking, frustrating, upsetting, all those kinds of things when you see a family member that's kind of suffering a little bit. But it was really just the dementia. It was really just the memory. She couldn't remember just the little things. It wasn't like she'd completely forget hours and hours of time, but it was enough to really affect her lifestyle and the family dynamic, for sure.
You love your mum, don't you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And for you to picture her being in an old person's nursing home,
yeah.
Like what does that image feel like for you?
Oh, that's terrifying, absolutely terrifying. I was lucky enough to be about 16, 17 years old when my great-grandparents passed away. And I've seen them go through the whole nursing home system. And it's terrifying. So imagining someone who really isn't deserving to, not that deserving to be there.
Yeah, not old enough, right?
Old enough, exactly, old enough to be there is just terrifying. Yeah, it's a sad place.
If you go on the internet, Alzheimer's, not preventable, irreversible, and all of that is simply not the truth. Alzheimer's is absolutely preventable. Alzheimer's is reversible up to stage 5. There's 7 stages of Alzheimer's. Even stage 6, we can hold the line and prevent progression. Stage 5, we can roll Alzheimer's back and regain some of that memory. So Alzheimer's is absolutely preventable and is to a significant degree reversible.
That's amazing. Tell us, how can we fix it?
Well, diet is your number one thing. Diet is critical. So we briefly mentioned that when we talked about it being another name as diabetes type 3. So avoiding sugar and sugar spikes. Sugar spikes cause Alzheimer's, sugar spikes cause diabetes, sugar spikes cause cancer. Many, not singularly, but one of the factors. And so what is a sugar spike? A sugar spike is when we eat a certain substance and it spikes the blood sugar more than 20 points. So this is critical in my treatment of Alzheimer's patients and cancer patients and in preventing aging, everything that I do. So I'll actually tell my patients, go to the local pharmacy and get a blood sugar meter. Check your blood sugar, eat the bowl of whatever you're going to eat, quinoa or corn or potatoes or fruit or whatever. Set your timer for 20 minutes and check your blood sugar again. If your blood sugar went up over 20 points, you can't eat that. That's causing a sugar spike. Sugar spikes cause damage everywhere from the brain to the pancreas to our little bitty blood vessels, our capillaries, nerves, sugar feeding cancer cells. Another critical element in diet is when not to eat. Because we not only want to be eating the right things, but fasting is a lost art in America. Hydration is huge. First of all, you're washing out toxins nicely, but DNA, for DNA to happen all day long, our cells are making DNA. Well, DNA looks like a rubber band wad inside of a cell and inside of the nucleus and inside of the mitochondria. And it literally has to unfold and string out for it to be copied, to create new structure, to create antibodies, whatever the cell, the body is creating, the cell is creating from that DMA. And then after it gets translated, it wads back up. Well, it can't, if things are dehydrated and it's compressed in there, it can't untangle itself, and so it needs, liquid is the medium in which everything happens in the body. Exercise is another one of those critical elements for the brain, for the body. There has never been a study done on exercise that showed it any detriment, and any study that I've ever read showed an improvement in whatever it was, from Alzheimer's to heart disease to atherosclerosis to diabetes. There is nothing that exercise doesn't help. Recently, one of my patients in her late 50s was experiencing some cognitive decline. She had noticed that she couldn't follow, having to take many more notes, and then pretty soon she was literally unable to work. We were able to reverse her cognitive decline using many of the techniques that I've just mentioned, and get her back to work, full-time back to work, instead of housebound, afraid that she would not find her way back home from the grocery store. A gentleman in his early 60s, big family history of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's. Again, struggling. His wife wouldn't let him go out, wouldn't let him go to the grocery store by himself, so at least stage 5 Alzheimer's. He's back fully functioning, doesn't have to make lists anymore, finds his way back home to the grocery store just fine, and is helping remind her of things again, so she knows he's back because he's his old self reminding her to do things. And these are stories that happen every day. The reason I do what I do is for people. It's about caring for people. It's about helping people stay healthy.
Tell me how your mother turned her situation around.
Well, she saw her naturopathic doctor. They ran a whole bunch of tests, and they found that she had a vitamin B12 deficiency, which is super easy to fix, thank God. So within 2 weeks, she was back to normal. She was doing vitamin B12 shots twice a week intramuscularly, and within that she still does them, but within that 2 weeks, she was back to just the amazing person that she is. So that was fantastic. It was like magic. It was really cool actually to see. Yeah.
And do you remember what effect that had on? That's bringing up emotion for you. What is it?
It is, yeah, it is. I don't know. It's just sorry. Knowing what I know now about dementia and how it affects the person as well as the family, it's scary. So I'm glad that there was a simple solution to such a complicated problem.
Yeah. Help me understand what you're feeling right now.
Relief.
Yeah.
Yeah, but empathy for the people that go through that have dementia, that don't have a simple solution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Knowing what I know now, and seeing, and having seen people go through what dementia actually does to a person, really, it's really scary and it's really heartbreaking. So I'm just glad that I got my mom back.
As a neurosurgeon, I have the privilege of being able to actually see into people's brains. And in the early days of neurosurgery, when we had to operate on a brain, we used to make a large window in the skull so we could see a large part of the brain. The advantage to seeing the brain, you realize when you see portions of the brain with your naked eye and see yourself actually taking parts of that brain out and then seeing the patient recover, you suddenly recognize that other parts of the brain are capable of taking over some of the functions that have been lost by the hemorrhage or by the surgical intervention. And that is all due to the brain's plasticity. So as a neurosurgeon, I've always had a great receptivity to this concept of plasticity. One of the most remarkable things that affected a lot of my career later on was during my training years. As a young surgeon, a resident, we used to do rounds on the patients in the hospital, and the professor would stop in front of a bed and ask the group questions about the patient. Talk to us about the patient, what was wrong with the patient, how would you treat this patient, and we'd do this from bed to bed. Except one bed, he'd always bypass it, and he would say, "Oh, this woman's in a coma, we don't need to stop here." And that bothered me. She was a young woman, she must have been in her mid-30s. So after rounds and everybody dispersed, I'd come back to her bed and I'd sit by the bed and just watch her for a while. And I'd do this every day for about 20 minutes to half an hour. And one day I started talking to her. Got no response. And I tried this again. And then one day she opened her eyes and she looked at me. And it looked as though she was kind of aware that I was there. And this went on for several days, and then eventually I'd ask her questions, she'd start answering, yes, no. And within a few weeks she began talking. This by now, about 3 months had gone by. So I said to her, do you remember anything from the last weeks, days, months that you've been here? And she said, yes. I remember that damn professor saying I will never wake up. And I was determined to prove that he was wrong. Boy, that stuck with me. That's one of the things that led me into becoming a specialist on coma and coma arousal techniques. That was a very, very, very powerful moment. It's been very successful over the last 40 plus years. I think I brought thousands of people out of coma. Some of them doing very well, some of them only getting partially better, but living at home, having a different quality of life than if they had been sent to a nursing home. The techniques involve several modalities of approach. These have to be considered as total individuals, not just the brain. And even though we're treating the brain, we want the brain to recover, we have to treat the entire body. So to arouse somebody from a coma involves, number one, making sure they have appropriate nutrition. We're back to nutrition again. Number two, ensuring that they get sufficient movement, even if it's passive movement. Passive movement means having a therapist come in or a relative come in and exercise their limbs so they don't tighten up on them. And then, very importantly, program of what I call multisensory stimulation, using the different senses in the body to stimulate all the different senses in a very systematic fashion, one after another, and repeating that over and over again, multiple times a day. Doing this until you start getting responses, and then when you start getting responses, depending on the response, you change that modality of stimulation. Just to give you an example, an individual who's lying in bed in a coma, who's not opening or moving their eyes, you might hold an eye open and shine a very bright light into it repeatedly, just a very brief flash, until you get a reaction. The way one normally sees a reaction to bright light is that the pupil, which is the dark part of the eye, constricts. Just like when we're out in bright light, the back of the eye becomes very small, becomes pinpoint. When you get that reaction, then you can start shifting to less bright lights, then presenting them with black and white images, and progress the sensory stimulation depending on how they're progressing. Same with the hearing, same with the sense of taste, same with the tactile senses. So it's a progressive program that's tailored to the level of responses.
So the fire is inflammation. What we've got to do is stop inflammation. And then cholesterol, we need cholesterol. If you don't have enough cholesterol, your liver will literally make cholesterol. So cholesterol is not the problem. And by lowering your cholesterol too much, you can get aging of the brain, and you can cause your sex hormones to be lowered, because cholesterol is a primary building block, structural block for cells. So we do not want to lower cholesterol too much. What we want to do is stop inflammation. Your natural agents for doing that are curcumin and SAMe, capital S, capital A, capital M, small e, berberine that I've already mentioned. There's a number of great honokiol, there's a number of great agents for lowering inflammation naturally. And I take all of those every day because inflammation is a key cause of disease and aging. Blueberry extract, and I eat wild blueberries most every day. Phosphatidylserine is an amazing substance to help prevent brain aging and Alzheimer's. Pregnenolone is another one of those key substances. Vinpocetine,
ashwagandha, an Indian Ayurvedic herb, super important. Another thing that's not frequently talked about is the microbiome of the gut. Unfortunately, we frequently damage that. We damage it with antibiotics and drugs, killing off the microbiome. So antibiotics are a primary cause of cancer. We know, for instance, that women that have had 6 doses of antibiotic before their 18th birthday have a 3-fold increase in breast cancer. And just recently there were some nice publications because the nipples have their own microbiome. They have bacteria in them. And the antibiotics have changed that microbiome, and that changed microbiome in the breast from antibiotics is now being shown as a cause of breast cancer. We knew it statistically, but now we're understanding why. The microbiome of the bowel communicates with the brain all the time and gives it information, so we must have good bacteria in our bowel. If you want to think about it a different way, we are parasites. There's only about 10 trillion of our cells, and we have 100 trillion bacteria in us and on us. So we're a parasite on our bacteria. So we want to have the absolute healthiest microbiome of bacteria that we can possibly have if we're going to be using them for energy and power and creating different things that our body needs. And so restoring the gut biome is critically important. And truthfully, there aren't many good probiotics out there. Most of them are lactobacillus and bifidus, whereas there's over 1,000 different bacteria in our bowel. And so we want diversity of bowel bacteria there. So eating things without washing them to death, without cleaning them to death, go out and eat a little dirt, like you did when you were a kid to help increase your gut biome. We can be too clean. We can absolutely be too clean. So taking care of that gut biome. So I'm not against anything medical. I'm just against the wrong use. We pass out antibiotics like candy. It is not healthy for us. Antibiotics can and should be used at critical moments. If you have sepsis, if you have this overwhelming disease, if you have this methicillin, but we can use other things. We can use ozone, we can use hydrogen peroxide, we can use natural herbal agents that kill bacteria. Oregano, there's a lot of great herbs that help kill. We can use silver. There's many things that kill bacteria that we can't use because they're not FDA approved, but we can certainly use them at home. We can use them outside of the hospital. So antibiotics, okay, when we're critical, we absolutely have to have them, yes, but other times, randomly, doctors prescribe them for a cold. Well, we know that colds are viruses, and we know that antibiotics don't kill viruses. So there's kind of an insanity going on out there with our use of antibiotics, and they're very destructive. They cause a lot of disease. What do we do? Well, if your mom or dad, or if Alzheimer's tends to run in your family, or if you've eaten tons of sugar over time, it's coming. But if we want to look at testing, genetic testing, you want to look at APOE. And if you've got 3, you're good. If you've got 2, you're great, because it's actually anti-Alzheimer's. If you've got 4, you're in trouble. So we can look at those markers genetically, and then other genetic things that we can look at. Imaging, MRI, and actually ultrasound is coming back into its own, as we can do a lot more things with ultrasound than what we used to do. We can do cognitive testing, the Wechsler memory scale, the revised one. So those are your tests to kind of look at, and there are more, of course, but we can do testing to look at that ahead of time. It is important to get those done, because Alzheimer's doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a year. It happens over 20 or 30 years.
I'm writing a book about this. The book is titled Alzheimer's is Not a Disease, which it isn't. It isn't a disease. And it's just it's the end stage, nothing unexpected about it, nothing unpredicted about it, of a long, decades-long progression, negative change progression. that ultimately results in a catastrophe. And as soon as they called it a disease, 12 years ago, they put everybody off on thinking that when you have it, you treat it, as opposed to how you should think about it, and that's to stop the decades-long progression. That's really how you should be dealing with it. You should be stopping it from ever happening in life. But we don't think about it that way in the mainstream of medicine.
You believe that Alzheimer's can be prevented?
Oh, absolutely. No question. Or you could say delayed for probably indefinitely in most people. But I also think that when you do that, the changes that you drive in the brain will lead to substantial increases of longevity.
So get tested early, get tested every 4 or 5 years, because it is preventable. Alzheimer's is preventable. And it is even reversible up certainly through stage 4, maybe stage 5. We can hold the line probably at stage 6. If you're stage 7, there's not much we can do. Well, again, the family tree, if Aunt Betty or mom or dad had it, then you certainly want to look at it. Or if you have been a sugarholic over the years, you're a prime candidate before it, because again, it's diabetes type 3 is another synonym for Alzheimer's. So if you've been kind of a sugar addict, a dessert addict, lots of potatoes, lots of corn, lots of starches over the years, corn syrup, colas, death by cola, then you want to go ahead and look at those things, because you're a prime candidate, because you've been having all these sugar spikes over the years. So that's what testing looks like medically. Treatment, all the dietary things that I've discovered, but in the medically intervention that we can do, there is a type of ultrasound that we can use which can have dramatic benefits on reversal of tau and plaque and Alzheimer's. There are certainly intravenous things that we can use. And then super cool things happening in the stem cell world. So much of the future of medicine is going to be stem cells. Some amazing things happening in the realm of stem cells. We've always known that that was a huge wave of the future for health and healing and longevity. But the technology is getting there now. We can now harvest your very own stem cells out of your body, not out of fat. We don't have to do the liposuction, not out of bones, literally out of your bloodstream, that have full telomere complements. So these cells aren't aged like you are. These are very young, youthful cells, your own stem cells, that we can capture, and then we can activate them with laser and certain frequencies. And now not only can we activate them, but we can place them. We can direct them where to go. So phenomenal advances in stem cells happening right now that are available to us today. I've seen significant with my therapies, from diet to exercise to nutritional to laser to stem, have significant reversal. A number of my clients are from Hollywood, or stars, or very important people that I can't talk about, but preserving their brain trust is critical to the nation, to have those minds around, to the movie industry, to different industries. But to have those brain trusts vital and vivacious into the future, we've got to have those. And we need yours, right? We need your brain working and working well. We need you healthy. We need your brain functioning. Aging, stopping aging, and I was recently spoke at the Carlisle conference in Cambridge, and there were so many things that are coming 10 years out, 20 years out. If you saw Dr. Aubrey Gray's TED Talk on aging and preventing aging, just a super fun TED Talk, you should watch it. But these things are coming 10 years down the road. As I looked at my audience, I said, many of us don't have 10 years. to wait on these things. Aging can be prevented now. We can hold the line for about 10 years right now, so that when we get to 10 years from now and we have all these new amazing agents, we can use them. Nicotinamide riboside is here right now. Amazing anti-aging agent. All the other things that I mentioned, dietary supplements, phenomenal anti-aging agents. So you can go down to your nutrition shop, you can go online, you can order those today and start taking them today to slow down aging or stop aging, so that when those get here in 10 years, you will still have an active, healthy mind and body, and you can take advantage of those things. And the phenomenal things that are coming down the pike, and actually we have today with stem cells. So the future is bright. The future is amazing. We have many things available to us right now to use to prevent aging, to actually reverse aging to some degree. And the future, the sun is just dawning, just peeking over the horizon. And this is going to be a bright, brilliant day for stopping aging and preventing Alzheimer's, and for longevity and having a vivacious, lengthy, healthy life.
Now, if you've enjoyed this series, what you're about to see right now is a video which I shot in Kenya showing the famine, the reality of what's happening to real people just like you and me in another country, in another circumstance. The reason why I'm showing this to you is because I believe that as children of God, as people that are interested in the Bible and its truth, and those of us that claim that we are followers of Jesus, that it is our responsibility to take care of one another. And so that's why I'm sharing this film, this footage with you, because I do believe there's a necessity to get these issues known around the world. We are supporting the famine with a large portion of the proceeds from people purchasing the Bible Health Secrets Gold Package. So I just wanted to make you aware of the tangible things that we're doing to make a difference, to help save lives. And we can only do that when we contribute, when we make that decision to be a part of something and to give. I want to encourage you to support these less fortunate people than us right now, to make a difference, to help change their lives. And the mother of this baby is dead, and the mother died from starvation, malnutrition, and her body was not able to handle having this child and being able to breastfeed. And there was not enough food for the both of them. This child is alive, but the mother is dead, and this child is severely malnourished. This baby is 4 months old, but these legs are so skinny, tiny little legs. Hey. What does it feel like to go without food?
When the body becomes weak, she cannot sleep, she cannot concentrate, she becomes very weak. And she feels a burning sensation inside her stomach.
What does she say?
They are not sick, it is only starvation. Okay, it is okay.
Tell us what it feels like.
To starve is very painful. It leads to wasting of the body the way it is. It is just like waiting for death.
Oh, okay.
Let's take a look at how this process works. What is causing this dramatic increase in health risk?
So what are the mechanisms? So how does childhood biography become adult biology? And that was the big question. So it turns out that certainly if you've had a rough childhood, if you've had ACEs in childhood, you are going to be much more likely to be part of destructive health patterns. So we know, for example, that if you've had a rough childhood, you're 7 times more likely than a person with no ACEs to, for example, engage in binge drinking or become, for example, an alcoholic. You're more than 11 times more likely if you have 4 ACEs to start using injection drugs. If you have 4 ACEs, you are more than 3 times as likely to do things like engage in risky sexual behavior and this kind of thing, and smoking. So obviously, that things that happen in childhood, we're in emotional pain and we're trying to numb it out with those kind of addictive behaviors. So obviously that's going to contribute to those health statistics in adulthood. But they also found that in the same study of 17,500 adults, if you didn't smoke, didn't drink, had normal cholesterol, good body mass index, you weren't overweight, and you exercise regularly, you still, if you had 7 ACEs, you had a 360% increased risk of heart disease despite all of that. So what was going on? Well, it's a couple of things. One is that there's now really amazing research looking at the impact of early life stress on epigenetics of the young children. And what they found is that essentially when we have early life stress, it changes the epigenetic expression of things like the glucocorticoid receptors, which is the part of the brain that is responding to stress. And it's the trigger in response to stress is a cortisol output. And what happens is with early life stress, the threshold of what it takes to trigger a chronic cortisol response becomes lowered. So you basically become more reactive to stress for a lifetime. So you get reset, the system gets reset. And this affects the entire neuroendocrine immune system, which is now reset from the date the trauma happens. So essentially the researchers are saying that from a young age, you're really marinating in inflammatory cytokines and your system's been reset. And it wasn't just the glucocorticoid receptor expression which changed, but also the genes of the entire genome that were changed from early life stress that make you more likely to have illnesses like heart disease, cancer, psychiatric imbalances, autoimmunity, everything. So first of all, early life stress affects epigenetic expression, and then through the processes of the neuroendocrine immune system, we become reset for a lifetime unless we intervene. Now, what most people don't realize is when they get some kind of trigger in adulthood, a trigger of autoimmunity onset, something triggers some other kind of disease, they think it happened, in that year. In truth, the start of the illness happened when the trauma happened in childhood. And the body remembers, even if you don't. The body changes in response to that trauma that you may have been unconscious of at the time, but the body keeps the score, so to speak. And really, the illness onset started maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago. So the other way that early life stress affects us is that it also impacts us at the belief and the identity level. So if, for example, we've had a traumatic experience in childhood, or perhaps we had attachment trauma, for example, we often, the child experiences attachment trauma as a type of abandonment. And this is where the child then has to kind of learn to cope with this trauma, and there will be coping mechanisms that in turn affect our behavior, which in turn lead to health problems again. So for example, if somebody had attachment trauma and experienced that as a form of abandonment, they'll get into patterns like, for example, feeling that they have to achieve, they have to be a super achiever in order to earn acceptance and love. Or it can also be they become a giver to others, but they become an over-giver to others because it was the way they learned to get love and acceptance in childhood was by giving to others. That's okay, but not when it comes at the expense of self and where it becomes a kind of an addictive pattern, a trauma pattern that in adulthood leads us not to take care of ourselves and ultimately leads to things like burnout. And we see that very prevalently, for example, in chronic fatigue syndrome. One of the most obvious examples of this is to do with people who become obese in adulthood. So there's a very strong correlation of people with trauma in childhood, especially the very obese, like 100 pounds overweight plus. The number of people who are morbidly obese who have been either sexually abused in childhood or have physical abuse in childhood is staggering. And it's interesting that the original ACEs study actually started in a weight loss clinic. It was at Kaiser Permanente, and the researchers there were working with people who were very overweight, and they were putting them on a great diet plan, and they were doing weight great, the people were losing weight, but they had a 55% dropout rate. And the researchers were wondering what was going on, why was this happening? So they started to interview all the people that were dropping out. And by mistake, they actually found out that a high level of these people were reporting abuse in childhood. And for example, one woman summed it up when she said, you know, the reason that I'm overweight is it's a self-protection mechanism from unwanted male attention. So in other words, if she was overweight, she was being protected. So a predator, a male, wouldn't come and be attracted to her and create trouble. So in her case, actually being thin is a threat to her very survival. So this is the type of person who's going to sabotage any kind of health protocol because their identity is threatened by being healthy. It's a threat to their very beingness. And that's what you often find with these other types of things as well, with, for example, chronic fatigue. A lot of us have forgotten how to relax. And a lot of that is to do with attachment trauma, where we have to be somebody, do something, achieve something. And if we try and relax and stop those things to get ourselves into balance, we often can't do it because on some level it's a threat to our very survival. So when you have these conflicting internal identity and belief systems happening, you can't stay compliant on a protocol. So you could have working with a great nutritionist or medical doctor who could educate you and tell you exactly what you should do, what foods to eat, what foods not to eat. But if you haven't dealt with an unresolved emotional trauma or even an unconscious belief system that's playing out, for example, where you don't think you deserve health, and it's a kind of semi-conscious belief, both your body and you will find ways to sabotage the protocol.
Well, conflicts and biological traumas are the root cause from an emotional perspective of any pathology. For example, is an accident truly an accident? Why does someone have a fall and they fracture their left ankle? Others have a fall and they get a bump on the head, right? So we look at the deep-seated emotional traumas. What are these? These are acute events in our life that were highly traumatic. We did not have a solution to at the time that they occurred. These are called like a deep high stress. So your example of obesity is a great one because patients that are obese, we oftentimes try to manipulate this with diets and exercise and all this, but if we don't work with the deep-seated trauma, it's much more difficult to get to a healthy weight. What is the main biological trauma associated with obesity? It's being a child and not been seen by your parents, being ignored, being told that you were not good enough. So then the body tries to survive, wants to survive. I have that trauma that I was worthless. So I need to be more visible. So I put on more weight so that people could see me. Yes, I am here, you see. So on the contrary, you have people that are very thin, and those are people that want to hide. They've had traumas that expose them, so now they just want to be invisible, not seen. So they want to hide. So it's, this is a long topic, and this is just an example. And in cancer, we have patients with let's say bladder cancer. Biologically speaking, the urine is to mark your territory, right? Animals mark the territory by urinating. So anyone with bladder cancer will have a territorial issue or a cash flow issue. So it's important to know that every pathology, every cancer has deep-seated emotional traumas and conflict.
These mechanisms of increased health risk make a lot of sense. People who have experienced trauma in their early life either consciously sabotage their health efforts, or the epigenetic expressions of trauma in their body do the sabotaging for them, often without them even realizing. So by now, you're probably wondering, is there anything I can do to counteract these increased health risks? Or perhaps you're a health professional and you aren't seeing the results you would like to see in your patients, and are curious about how an ACE could affect their progress. Well, the good news is there are ways you can move forward and overcome these negative effects to take charge of your own health.
So, this is so important for practitioners to understand, health practitioners. We need to understand the subjective state of our patients. We need to understand their subjective history so that we can preempt this. And we are not just looking at trying to educate, we're also looking at why people behave the way they do. We all know people should stop smoking for health, and a lot of them still do it. The same as drug addicts, the same as alcoholics. So it's not the piece of education needed. Everybody can say stop smoking. You can tell somebody who's overweight, you could ask them what healthy foods they should be eating. They'll probably know exactly that vegetables and fruit are healthy, but can they do it? Because so much of food is emotional eating. And so it's not enough just to give education. You're also going to need to help people on the emotional level as well. So in terms of reversing this, there's many different ways. And normally step one is, if you haven't heard about emotional trauma and how this may have been a factor for you in your current challenges, the first step to do is really explore. So go and get your ACE score. I mean, if you just type in Google ACE score, Adverse Childhood Event Score, you can find the original questionnaire online that the researchers used, and you can literally answer the questions and start journaling. Journaling has been found to be therapeutic. These are some of the things that you can just do on your own to begin with, and start to look back and, were there certain events that happened in childhood where it impacted you, and were there any adults around to help you through that? Because if there was nobody there to support you, that means that the ACE is more likely to have impacted you. Having even one supportive adult around you can mitigate the impact. And think about things like, do you remember something that happened that then changed your behavior? Did you start destructive health patterns? Did you learn to behave in a certain way that was your survival and your coping mechanism? Do you suspect there may have been attachment or relational trauma? There's actually an adult attachment interview questionnaire, also you can get it available online as well, where you can sort of go into a little bit more depth and really explore that. It's because it's harder to self-report and to know about that. And there are also books and resources that you can read again that we can also give out on this. And so it's this kind of exploration process, and journaling about it can be therapeutic in itself. Just even talking to somebody about this in a trustworthy person that's going to be non-judgmental, just talking about it because you may have never talked about it before can be therapeutic. The reason some people will collapse and get ill in the face of those stresses is usually you can look into childhood and you can see how much resilience they had to start with. So if they're already depleted because of ACEs in childhood, it's going to define and it will predict how we're going to respond to issues that happen in adulthood. Is anything that will put you into a happy, creative, centered state. It could be sunbathing, it could be forest walking, it could be time in nature, it could be time at the beach. Anything where you don't have to perform, you can't fail at it, it's not stressful, you can't be judged. It's a pure time of sort of expression of joy and happiness and being in a safe space. And you might actually need to teach your body how to do that, and we'll talk about that where some people need the extra help. But for the rest of us, and we need it daily, because imagine all the times you've conditioned the brain not to be in that state, which is at least 50% of us have been conditioned to be in a chronic state of stress, and we get up every morning like the house is on fire. Now, obviously, for some, if you've had a lot of trauma and it's been quite severe, and especially if it's early, you are also obviously going to need to, for some, look at potentially professional help as well. And the good news is there's really good professional help available.
We had a patient, for example, that had leukemia. One of the conflicts with leukemia is lack of self-worth, not being good enough. So this person, growing up as a young boy, his father always used to say, "You're not good enough, your brother is stronger, faster, smarter than you, you're not going to amount for anything." So lack of self-worth. This boy grows up, in his 40s, he develops leukemia, correlated directly with that biological conflict. So all the chemo in the world, all the natural therapies in the world are not going to get him to a favorable outcome if we don't address those biological traumas. So I had that patient write a letter to his then deceased father, and then I had him speak it, say it out loud. Word is powerful. And then I had him burn the letter, and that was his letting go. So he forgave, he let go of that trauma, and we know what the result was. He lived far longer than anyone expected, because when he came to us, he was given 2 weeks to live. And this patient lived over 1.5 years, which we might say, oh, that's not a good result, but from 2 weeks to living 1.5 years of good quality of life was short of a miracle, right? So just by, not just by, but addressing that biological trauma.
And as you're sorting through the emotional and psychological hurdles that are stopping you from having optimal health, remember that it's also important to address the physical at the same time to give yourself the best possible platform for recovery and renewed vitality. Next, let's look at the things that help us recover. A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Proverbs 17:22.
Other steps to recovery that are very important is we do need to address the physical impact of the trauma. So the epigenetic changes that have happened. We know that early life stress leads to gut permeability. It changes the bacteria in the gut and the balance of the bacteria in the gut. It changes the immune system cells in the brain. It changes, as I mentioned, the way the immune system functions towards it changes the way the immune system functions. So we need to also address the physical impact with physical interventions. So part of recovery from an illness that has an emotional component is looking at things like healing leaky gut. You may need to make some dietary changes. You may need to be on an anti-inflammatory, low grain diet. Can be a very important part of reversing the physical impact. So diet's hugely important. An anti-inflammatory type of approach often is very relevant for people whether it's autoimmunity, whether it's leaky gut and so on. Also, the straightforward aspects like balancing blood sugar, because all of that can lead to changes in your anxiety levels, proneness to anxiety and depression. It's a vicious cycle because the emotional trauma at the beginning will actually change your biology, and then the changes that have happened in your biology will increase the anxiety and the impact of the trauma. So we know, for example, if you have dysbiosis in the gut, you're more likely to have things like anxiety and depression, and things like probiotics actually can make people less anxious. And they're even starting studies looking at using probiotics to help people with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So we do need to look at that. You can also address the impact of trauma, which may have been over a long period, by addressing things like neurotransmitters, where you can work again nutritionally and taking nutritional compounds, for example, to maybe balance levels of serotonin or dopamine and so on. So those will be important contributing factors that I would address to help the overall balance. So diet and lifestyle factors, things around sleep and circadian rhythms are really important. So, avoiding the blue light at night, getting up at a reasonable regular time every morning, all the kind of things that we would look at, for example, if you went to see a nutritionist or you went to see a functional medicine practitioner, that is all part of recovery from the impact of emotional trauma. So I guess the point is that I'm making here is don't throw out the physical approaches, just because it was emotional. The physical work that we do is still hugely important, and it will be a fundamental part of the recovery. So make sure that you're looking at the physical side.
Taking care of our own gut helps us reverse the effects of trauma. Something as simple as taking probiotics, getting sunlight, getting enough rest, all help contribute to reduce trauma and anxiety. Another vital aspect to look at when dealing with trauma is the spiritual. So many people find strength and comfort in a relationship with God, but this can help them address previous trauma and also deal with traumatic events that come up against in the future. It also takes supernatural intervention. I do believe it takes supernatural intervention to break the cycle of pain and trauma.
But if you have faith, or if you have a framework like you believe in God, or you have a strong religious or kind of spiritual framework that you have in your life, getting through that stage of the grief and existential questioning can hasten your recovery and back into the reintegration stage. And this goes back to people like Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who was in the Holocaust, and he wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And he basically said that the people who survived this traumatic Holocaust event the best were people who'd created a positive meaning of why this was happening, and they had purpose around it. So they had a reason to get better. They had it, it wasn't just a hopeless case where there was no reason to live and they don't understand what happened to them. They got into a helpless space. The meaning that you give the illness and having a purpose and a reason to recover can be the difference between whether you recover or not. And, we ignore this factors in so many of our patients. We're so focused sometimes on just the diet or probiotics or, a sleep pattern that we want them to do. And yet this essence of meaning, what's a person's raison d'etre? What's their purpose in life? It's a kind of the it's almost like I call it the unquantified self, this part that you can't quantify. How do you quantify the meaning? I can quantify, your blood sugar levels. I can quantify whether you've got bad or gut bacteria, and I can address that, and I can measure it, and I can intervene. But what about this unquantifiable meaning? And this is where we get more into the art, and we get into the the religion side of it, or it might be spirituality or faith. It's a fundamental part of recovery. And just as we need to understand the subjective state of our patient's history, we should also know where they are in their own process of right now, who they are, and are they going through a total ego breakdown because they can't be the person that they were before. And that's why so many of I have a lot of friends and colleagues who have had major illnesses that cause them to be bedbound or housebound for 7 or 8 years or whatever, and all of them have gone on to do amazing things, gone on to be documentary filmmakers, have built huge clinics and helped thousands of people. So what they did with that is they refused to be, beaten down by what happened to them. They turned that experience into a way of having actually an amazing life and giving back to everybody. So, it's whatever works for you as a person, but also, having a belief, faith, and a purpose and a meaning and a framework that may come through religion for you, for that can be very powerful, and prayer as well. These are, prayer has been absolutely proven to be helpful in healing. It's in, science studies as well. So, it's another one of the most important factors I wish that more practitioners were aware of. And that I would encourage, clients and patients, to actually explore what's happened to them, to acknowledge, what they may be going through, the impact that it's had on them. Have a look at what stage of trauma they may be in because of the illness itself, and what's your reason to get better, and dig in and start connecting into an inspiring reason to recover. And that's also a good reason why you want to read inspiring books, watch inspiring movies, explore other people's success stories about how they recovered from a particular illness, so that you can absorb that as well, and it becomes part of your drive and reason for recovery as well. It's hugely important. So there's also something called diseases of meaning, and this is where it's kind of this idea that if we buy into this idea that the reason for existence and humans on this planet is because just a bunch of atoms and molecules bounced together by mistake, and it was all just, par hasard, it just showed up that way, and it was no meaning or purpose to it, and we're all here kind of by mistake. And that led on to Shakespeare and to kind of art and science. I mean, if you buy the idea that we're just, a bunch of molecules that bounce together in a particular way and then we showed up, that can lead to diseases of meaning, which is, one of the things that science isn't really offering is the answer to these ultimate questions. And if there's no real meaning or purpose behind us being here, that can lead to destructive behaviors, because why believe in anything? Why have health? Why do anything? Because there's no purpose or meaning to it. And so there was actually a World Health Organization report on diseases of meaning where there was a problem on the planet, because if we don't have purpose or meaning, it's a kind of, again, it's this existential purposelessness, which leads to pointlessness, helplessness, and basically people taking out their frustrations through destructive health patterns, drug addiction, and all this kind of thing. So I've definitely seen that all of my friends or colleagues, and often business partners that have been very chronically ill themselves, have not accepted, if you like, that worldview, and very much have seen sort of purpose and meaning in the universe, and kind of haven't accepted this kind of meaningless existence that parts of science are offering as the reality. So and people have expressed their faith. You can express your faith in different ways, but there's definitely this kind of, there's a purpose and a meaning behind the reason that bad things happen to good people. And if we can find and connect into that purpose and meaning, and that it was, that it's not just, pointless, which would lead us to hopelessness. The reason that these are happening is that I become a more compassionate, giving person. That's a reason for existence. And there are definitely people who've recovered because they describe that as believing in God, and believing that there's, if you like, there is a plan and a purpose and a meaning. So it's been part of pretty much everybody I know that has gone on to really recover and do create a powerful life where they've changed many other people's lives that may have not been their intention, but they ended up being, even if it's just they've become a great person to know, and they're a kind of integrated, balanced person that got over this illness. They very much have strong faith. So I think it's a foundational part of recovery, is having some kind of faith system that provides the framework to, give you that raison d'etre.
Danny, if you could take away all the terrible things that happened to you, if you could wave a magic wand over
and
your
make
life,
them go away.
Would you?
No.
Why not?
No, I wouldn't. Two things. One is, all of those terrible things that have happened to me, I had a certain picture and perception of them, but it wasn't the complete picture. And there are things in my life that I built a doctrine on that doesn't line up with the Word of God. If those things had not happened, all the traumas that I've suffered through, which are so many, and I would never want those things to happen to another person. However, those very things is what God has used to train me. It's those traumas that He used to develop character and perseverance. It's those things that He has caused maturity to come. I look at what He's done in me in the last 10, 15 years, and I'm like, wow, God. Far exceeded my expectations. He's blown my mind. It's those traumas that He has healed me from, that has shown me His love, that has shown me His character. You see what I mean? Like, we can take our traumas and see ourselves and be perceived as a victim. Or you can ask God to give you new eyes to see deeper into that situation, a fuller picture, to see really what was the purpose of that, to see what got produced out of that. Because without those experiences, what are you? What are you? How we respond out of trauma either builds character or we make choices that makes us of bad character. So I wouldn't take away a single one of those traumas. No way. What I've learned out of it is priceless. And what I've gained in my relationship with God, I would never want to trade.
What we do something called recall healing. And with recall healing, it's taking you back through a timeline of your life and looking at maybe traumas that you had as a child and addressing those traumas so that your body can heal old traumas. So we would talk, she would talk about, her childhood and, ways that she had been hurt or, friends that had hurt her feelings or, just bad, poor relationships, poor choices. So we would go through that. So I think more than anything, her faith was a good example for not just somebody that had cancer, but for everyone that walks the face of the earth. She taught a lesson for everyone.
Yeah, I think faith plays a huge role when it comes to our overall health. It's really about our belief system, and that, in a sense, one of the big things that we have to focus on is really our stress response. And so in our nervous system, we have two responses. We have a fight or flight response called our sympathetic nervous system, and a rest, rebuild, and digest part of our nervous system, which is called our parasympathetic nervous system. And so when we are being driven by a fear of failure or a fear of rejection as kind of the root of our behaviors and the way that we view life, our worldview, then we're gonna end up living out of a fight or flight mode, as opposed to when we live out of a mindset of identity, of purpose, of love, of compassion, of really moving with the Spirit and allowing God to run our lives. When we're living through that perspective, now we start to activate that parasympathetic nervous system, which really allows our body to heal and regenerate at its highest level. So having belief and faith that our body can heal itself, that God created us for a greater purpose than our own physical experience on this planet, to know that and to believe that and to believe and trust in His healing power and to believe and trust that He created us to be an overcomer is a huge component to relaxing the stress response, stimulating the parasympathetic response, which puts our body in the best position to heal itself.
There's a couple, and they're going to be in this documentary, which is really cool. And so you'll see them and hear their story. But their daughter, brain cancer, 4 years old. She's dying. They've tried 2 years of conventional. She's done 80 to 100 chemo rounds. This poor kid. Could you imagine? And these parents, they had to make that decision. We're not going to keep doing this. We're not going to keep making the child suffer. And she had a stroke because of all the invasive surgeries, like because they opened up her brain, but the last thing, they got waken up during the night. The last thing that they ever saw was she breathed the last breath, and both sides smiled, and they had a confirmation that they would see their daughter again in heaven. If you were to experience what you experienced with Olivia, and now to be in the situation you're in with having no hope that you'll ever see her again in heaven, that place doesn't exist, that there is no God, where do you think you'd be right now?
I'd be in trouble. I'd be in big trouble.
Why? What do you mean?
For me personally, it probably would have been suicidal, It's just really depressing to the point of not wanting to be under that weight anymore. I'm not interested in being an addict of anything, So for me personally, I could see all those scenarios panning out. Just divorce, drugs, drinking, and ultimately a state of depression where you're looking for a way out.
For me, I just grew in this very it's you and me, God, you know what I mean? Like, you just grow in this intimacy with the Lord and just trusting with the Lord and allowing him to be your Heavenly Father.
I've seen God move in so many different ways, and I've seen the power of my testimony break strongholds off of other people's lives. So I would say that that to the listener, that you know, God says that he has a purpose for your life before you were even born, and I would call you forward into that purpose in this time, in this specific time.
The only way you're gonna get through that is to give it to the Lord and let him do like a healing work. And the Bible talks about in Psalms how God would bind up the wounds of the brokenhearted. And really, I think a lot of times when we go through this, we're gonna push God out and we're going the wrong way. We need to press in towards God and let him do what only he's gonna be able to do anyways. But I think the other piece of this is when you press into God and allow him to heal, you have to let go of all of the things, all of the guilt, all of the shame, all of the I should have done this, what if I had done this, would it have made it different? All of that has to go. And I almost would say for anyone listening who's dealing with guilt or shame, they literally need to say out loud that they're releasing those things. So if it's forgiving themselves, if it's forgiving someone else, if it's literally saying, I'm letting go of my guilt, I'm letting go of shame, I'm letting go of feeling like I got robbed. I was robbed of that time that I should have had. I was robbed of this. You need to say that and you need to release it, because if you hold on to all of that, you're gonna get stuck, and nobody wants to be stuck in that place. There's such a realization for me when Olivia passed. I knew I couldn't get stuck in this place because I have 2 other girls and they couldn't afford for me to get stuck in that place and not be a present parent for them, because then what happens to them? Well, I almost had a mom, but she was stuck back there where my sister passed away, and I never got to experience that, you know? So all of that, you know, we really have to take God up on his word and allow him to do like what he says he's gonna do. And I think that would be my message to the person who is hurting, the person that is stuck, you know? Let God do what he says he's gonna do. Take him up on that offer.
Where do you think you'd be if you didn't find healing through your faith?
I'd be a mess. Honestly, I'd be a mess. I mean, I don't know how much people talk about like the actual process of grief, but I remember the process of grief in like the first 3 months after Olivia passed. And there's literally the section of like, you can't really tell if you're awake or you're asleep or you're dreaming. Like, you're in that much of a fog and that much shock, and you start to slowly come out of that and realize it's really real. Like, you can tell that you're awake now and that this really happened, and just the disbelief of what has happened. In all of that, I really was really candid with God about how I was feeling, because this is also something like where Andre and I could freely talk about, but you talk to, you know, family and friends, and sometimes your pain and what you're dealing with is actually like crushing to them. And it's not even really something you can put on another person that doesn't understand what it is. It's that dark, you know? So Andre and I would talk freely, but I really just remember, I mean, I think unloading is really the word that's appropriate, but just unloading on God. And it would just be him and I. And some of those moments, I literally remember just screaming and yelling and driving, and I was just talking to God. And it seemed like every time I came to him in that place, he would just, he would always do something. He would always either, you know, somebody would call me and it would just be encouragement, or he'd put somebody in my path, or he would just completely give me peace in that moment where it's like that whole feeling of just absolute despair left, you know? So that really, for me, I don't know how else you get through this place. There's to me, there's not another way, there's not another answer. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think you can get through this if you can't take that all to God and let Him deal with it and transform your heart and take away your pain and just move you out of that space, you know?
God is glorified even through our pain and suffering, and this couple could have got angry at God, and they're just a real amazing role model to me.
Wow.
That whatever happens in my life, I'm not gonna, praise the Lord, God willing, I'll not blame God for it. I'll see Him as the author of healing, not the author of the destruction.
God's given our body that ability to survive and to live, and it's only by His grace that none of us are dead right now. So I take every day as a gift, but my focus is on heaven, and my focus while I'm here on earth is to bring as many people as I can and to help them ease the suffering, because it has to be intentional. We can't be armchair Christians when it comes to health and wellness, or it's just going to get swept right under us.
So are there secrets in the Bible that we can address that will give us healthy, lengthy lives? And I'd say absolutely yes. Number one is a spiritual issue, and that is forgiveness. If you say the Lord's Prayer, Jesus' disciples are coming to Him, and Jesus prayed. He prayed all the time. He's leaving the disciples, going out and spending a night on the mountain praying. And he's fasting. His disciples weren't fasting, but He was fasting. And so there's this critical time alone with God, and the disciples come to Him and say, Lord, you're doing this all the time. You're praying, and teach us how to pray. And so Jesus is saying, about God's kingdom come and His will being done on earth and all of this. And then right in the middle He says, forgive us our trespasses. This is how you're to pray. Forgive us our trespasses, just as, two funny little words in the middle of that, just as we forgive those who trespass against us. And in case we miss that, it's the only point in the Lord's Prayer that He goes back afterwards and covers. And He says, for if you do not forgive your brother here on earth, your Heavenly Father will not forgive you. And He says that in a very similar fashion in other places. So in the realm of, so that was spiritual. In the realm of emotions, the Scripture is very clear. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath. Anger is a very unhealthy emotion. Very, very unhealthy emotion. It stirs all sort of chemokines, cytokines, adrenaline, epinephrine, and these dumb down our immune system. They just like stop your immune system, put it on hold, and then our immune system isn't able to respond because of these hormones, this cataclysmic stuff that we're releasing in our body because of anger. So anger is, Jesus got angry. We can get angry. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. And if you're in a continual state of anger, that's not where, because I think it's hard to be in love and anger at the same time. And we know that Christians are going to be known by their love. So I'm not saying we can't get angry, but it's certainly not going to be a major part of our life or being demonstrated on a daily basis. The other very, very unhealthy emotion is fear. And again, the word speaks to that, and that is, fear not. I'm told, I honestly haven't looked, but I'm told that it happens 365 times in the Bible, one for every day of the year. So fear not. Fear is not a healthy emotion. Again, it puts our whole immune system into fight or flight, release of all sorts of unhealthy chemicals, stops all the normal processes, stops cognition, creative part of the brain. It just shuts it down. Anger and fear both do. So these are not healthy emotions, which the Bible is clear on their place in our life. So lowering your level of stress, needing less, not living the active American lifestyle, the standard American lifestyle of getting more, having more, being more in debt, more stress. So lowering our level of stress, getting adequate amounts of sleep, critical to being healthy. I recently was reading, someone asked, how do we stay healthy? He said, go and lie on the beach in the sun, holding the hand of the one you love. So we're in love, we're in connectivity, we're getting healthy energy, and we're grounding. So all of those things are vital to healthy lifestyles. So so those are kind of the cornerstones of health and of the way we should be living on a moment-by-moment basis.
Anxiety is completely traced to unforgiveness.
Really?
It is absolutely tracked to unforgiveness. Fear is tracked to unforgiveness. Rebellion, insubordination is connected to unforgiveness. Every kind of disease is connected to unforgiveness. There's a long, long list that I have personally experienced and have found through working with thousands of people myself and with my own life. So what happens if you're unforgiven? You're condemned. It's really simple. So, and I find that people rather be forgiven than to forgive. Everyone wants forgiveness, but whether or not they will release somebody else is another story. So if I were to walk you through this process, it's two things: confess and be healed, forgive and be healed. So what does that look like? I ask the Holy Spirit right now, who is it that you need to forgive? Who is it that you're holding on to? Who is it? Who is it that you're holding on to? Who is it that you are, that you have that angst against? Is it your spouse? I mean, if you've been married for, a month or more, there's a good chance you might have a long laundry list of people, of things that your spouse has done that you are upset with. That there's a list of things, of expectations that you never spoke that have not been met. They're unspoken expectations which simply just hurt the relationship. Failures, things that you're holding against that person. But if you ask the Holy Spirit even right now, like, who do I need to forgive? Who am I embittered towards? For me initially, when I asked that question, it was my father. That name came up for 6 solid years. And why? There was so much trauma involved with that. It might be somebody from your childhood. It could be a school teacher. It could be an old classmate. It could be like the girls that used to bully me on the way home from school nearly every day, especially in my 6th grade year. It could be a trauma that happened even with losing somebody or losing something that was important to you, meaning an animal or something like that. Or it could have been a move that when you were young, moving away from your family, moving away from everything that was comfortable to you, and that then produced all this angst inside of you. And so who is there during that particular trauma? So if you do simply, you follow the fruit to the root, if you look at the fruit in your life, and if it's anxiety you're dealing with, or it's high levels of stress, frustration, and again, health problems, right? So they have already noted, the medical community has already proven that majority of all health problems are caused by stress. Well, what's stress caused by? Stress is caused by emotion. That stress is an emotion. And so there's emotions that are happening inside of you that you are clearly thinking, it's my heart. I've got this arrhythmia, or I have hypertension, or I have this or that. High cholesterol, or my thyroid isn't working. I don't know if you know this also, but they've linked obesity to unforgiveness. It's completely linked. All the food addictions, the shopping addictions, the debt addictions, the porn addictions, the alcohol addictions, it's all the same addictions, and it again is to mask and to try to tone down or make yourself feel better, or to alleviate stress. None of it works. Absolutely none of it works, and it's never going to work. So clearly you need the Holy Spirit right now to direct you and searching your own heart. And it's that prayer that even David said, where he said, search my heart, oh God, know and show of my ways, and deliver me from those ways, and lead me into a way of everlasting. And so do you ask him to do that? There's no reason to fear, because God actually uses the sin in our life. He has to walk us through our sin. He walks us through our shame to take us to a place of freedom. And he does this with his love. And so you can trust him with that. And it's not the father or your school principal or whoever it was that slapped your hand with a ruler or beat you if you were beaten like I was. That's not who our Father in heaven is, but he is a gentle, loving Father who sees the torment in which you're living in right now, who sees the pain, who sees all the suffering, maybe even the suffering you don't even see. And he wants to walk you through that.
Well, I definitely think that when you're battling something, that faith works, because I believe that you need, when you're going through a tough time, whether someone's battling cancer, heart disease, stroke, whatever it may be after an accident, to me, when we have that faith that there's got to be something deeper than us, beyond us, then that helps us get through tough times. I can't imagine going through a tough time without having the strength to rely on my faith. So for me, I think it's definitely something that helps. It's definitely healthy to have that faith. And it takes practice, it takes work. And I think if there was someone listening today that is not of faith, I think the best thing to do is to ask questions and to do some interrogation on your own and read the Bible and to learn about the wisdom that is shared in the Bible. And it becomes a foundation. So for me, who I am and how I lead my life, hopefully is one that is in correlation to the values of someone in the Bible or of Jesus Christ.
Did your faith help when it came to the tragedy of losing your father at a young age?
Yeah, I would definitely say that going through my father's death, that was the time I questioned my faith the most. And I realized by questioning my faith the most, that's also after the fact is when I was probably at my deepest faith at that point in my life. So I think going through tough times, you have one or two ways. You can crack and not rely on faith, or you can question everything you've been through and rely on your faith. And for me, I chose the latter, to rely on my faith, and that got me through a tough time. These are all things that I deal with even now, is making sure my faith is intact and I'm investing my time in my faith. Because if you don't invest time in it, then you're not going to be as strong as you want to or need to be.
Now, when it comes to thinking about Jesus and the things that he has done, when it comes to like something like self-esteem, self-worth, I think that we all need to discover, because it helps us to love our bodies, it helps us look after our bodies. But does meditating on the things that Christ has done for you help you, and have you seen that work for people?
When it comes to health, I think definitely more mental health. And I think those that possibly have a lot of distraction or doing things they shouldn't do, sometimes that causes worry. And what does worry do? Worry causes fear and anxiety. And once again, now we have worry, fear, anxiety, panic, and all the things that can rob us of being our best. And yes, it can lead to some deleterious side effects physically as well. And wherever that's coming from isn't necessarily the important part, but when you have all of these different effects going on of stress, anxiety, fear, worry, they are no doubt going to affect your physiological parameters as well. So the mental and physical and spiritual undoubtedly are closely tied together.
And in the healing process in cancer particularly, these are the patients that do the best. So if we look back in ancient time, the healing and health started at a spiritual divine level first, then it went into the emotional, and lastly the physical. Right? And oftentimes nowadays, it's just about the physical and we forget about the spiritual and the emotional. And at Hope for Cancer, we focus a lot in these three areas, right? We don't have a reductionist point of view where we kind of, put things in silos, right? We put the physical body here, the emotional body here, and the spiritual here. And most often only the physical silo is addressed. We address the holistic part of the human being, and only there can you get healing. And sometimes the healing is not necessarily on a physical level, because when you're healed spiritually and emotionally, you're healed.
About a month after my daughter had survived a double aneurysm and almost completely died, she was 16 years old, which was a massive trauma on our family. About 3.5 weeks after that, I couldn't get out of bed. And I had suffered from back problems for 23 years. I was told I needed surgery when I was 18 years old by 4 different surgeons. And again, it was the mindset of, my dad had 4 back surgeries, even though it was the man that adopted me. I had no blood relation. So, you're going to have surgery. So I was like, I don't think I'm going to do that. That was the door opener for the drug addiction for the man that raised me. So long and the short of it was January, by January 7th, I am at UC Stanford. And it was supposed to be a simple disc surgery. And I'm allergic to every pain medication that exists. All the opiates, all the narcotics. I break out in hives. Benadryl works for about 3 days and then it's done. So surgery and me are not the best of friends. And so I was suffering with extreme pain. So it was my sciatic nerve. I had a fracture the size of a marble on my sciatic nerve. So it was excruciating. There's nothing that relieved the pain, absolutely nothing. So I buckled down and, you know, obviously we were praying for me. Obviously we were doing everything we knew to do. However, I was still in pain and the record showed that I needed, this had to be surgically taken care of. So I go and I find the best doctors that actually specialize in this particular thing. He looks at me and says, I'll have you out of pain in an hour and I'll have you walking home tomorrow. I was in the hospital for 7 days, totally paralyzed. I was paralyzed for 2 months. And that was horrific, absolutely horrific. Everything was frozen, my organs. Bowels were completely frozen. Nothing worked, just nothing in my body worked. So I had 24/7 care, I had nursing care at my house. They converted my house to totally handicap accessible with ramps and, you know, I had their little grabber, meaning we changed my entire life, that this was now going to be it. This is going to be my outcome. Okay, God, I will serve you from a wheelchair. I don't care. So the week before I got healed, something really powerful happened. I'd gone to 2 different pain specialists and both of them looked at me and said, there's nothing we can do. So I had all those essential oils to be able to help. I had chiropractic, I had massage. I mean, I had everything. I had a chiropractor live with me for 25 days. One who I actually led to Christ. And so on February 7th, prior to February 7th, I cried out to God after I left the specialist, the pain specialist, and I'm laying in the back seat, crying and just saying, well, Lord, whatever your will is, I trust you. And if your will is to heal me, so be it. Whenever you are ready for your servant to stop suffering, I'm ready. And I don't care how long it takes. But if this is your will that I am in this kind of pain and that this is my condition for the rest of my life, then so be it. No matter what, I am still going to love you. I am still going to serve you in whatever capacity it is that I have to serve you. Less than a week later, it's February 7th. We had canceled our First Steps to Success seminar because I was paralyzed. More importantly, I was in excruciating, screaming pain throughout the day. 10 out of 10 pain every 2 hours, which is suicidal pain. My husband went and did the event. And it was a Saturday night and we could watch it through the internet. In a house full of people. My kids were with me, my best friend was with me, my biological father came, my brother was right next to me. And our clients, my husband got up on the stage and he says, you know, Danny is suffering greatly right now. And he told what was the reason why I wasn't there and what had happened. And he says, will you please pray for her? And so he started passing around the mic and all of our clients just started going at it, praying for my healing. And the very last one was Ben Coleman and he said, Danny Johnson, if you can hear me now, pick up your mat and walk, which is the same exact words that God spoke to me when I was homeless. To walk away from my drugs, to walk away from my lifestyle. And that's the next day when I started my business from the trunk of my car in a payphone booth and became a millionaire in 2 years. Danny Johnson, if you can hear me, pick up your mat and walk. And instantly, I could feel my girlfriend was touching me. She was there the whole night. She was rubbing my leg, but I couldn't feel it because I had no feeling. My legs were purple. From here down, I was purple. So all of a sudden, I felt her touch, and I went, oh my gosh, Jerry, how long have you been doing that? She's like, doing what? Rubbing my leg. All night? I can feel it. And I said, let's do this thing. And I took my leg out of the wheelchair leg, whatever you call those things. So I picked my leg up, put it on the floor, moved that thing, picked my other leg up, moved that thing. My brother got on my left, my dad got on my right. They lifted me up and I moved my foot to take my very first step, took my second step, and I said, done, real? And I went bolting through my house, went up the stairs to where all my kids slept upstairs, went up the stairs and started doing squats and cursed the devil. How dare you from keeping me from heading upstairs to pray over my children every single night. You go to hell. You have no right over my life. Came back down the stairs. Everyone was bawling. My son had a video camera, witnessed the entire thing. It was the most miraculous physical healing that I had ever experienced, and that anybody that was in that room had ever experienced, because pretty much everyone had lost hope that this is it. This is the new Danny Johnson, and nope. And it wasn't until I totally surrendered. Do you understand? Like, people fight, and that's what I was doing. I'm fighting against this back and this paralysis, and as soon as I surrendered, I just said, whenever you're ready to have your suffering servants suffer no more. Whenever you want, I'm available. And I will shout, remember this, I will shout from the mountaintops that you are the one that healed me. And God, you know how many people I know. And you also know how many people they know. And we will glorify your name everywhere if you choose to heal me. And if you choose not to, I'm still gonna glorify your name. So the ball's in your court whenever you want to. It's your time.
I really believe relying on God is important in the emotional category. We all have our own emotional stressors, traumas, current, past, but how we react obviously is very individualized as well too, which can make it tough, and really, you know, relying on the guy upstairs, I believe, is super important.
Absolutely. To me, faith is essential because I want to say it eliminates fear, but it certainly brings peace around fears of things like disease, because when you trust that there's a higher purpose and God is in control, then you're not going to worry about those things as much. And fear can drive disease, right? I mean, fear is a negative emotion that has energy around it that can drive disease. So if you can use your faith as a way to let go of fear, you're already much healthier, right? And fear is interesting because fear really is a version of faith. Fear is faith that something sort of negative is going to happen. Mm-hmm. So if you can flip that around and have faith that God is on your side and God, has your back, then nothing bad can happen, including health problems. I do. I believe that it's all connected, and I think our emotional health is a huge part of our physical health. I don't think we can separate them. And I think if you are chasing the wrong things or focused on the wrong things, wrong areas in life, that it can create emotional turmoil, unrest, lack of peace, which can certainly lead to stress and disease. I mean, stress especially, I work with a lot of people with diabetes and blood sugar problems, and stress, sleep problems. These are all major drivers for blood sugar problems, inflammation, cardiovascular disease, cancer. And that peace, people find peace in all different ways, but I think finding God and having a relationship with God is, to me, the best way, the best path towards that internal peace that I think we all really want.
The Bible has outlined tools for us to utilize to take care of our bodies, and when we stray from those teachings, our bodies suffer. So if you're dealing with health issues that just don't seem to be resolving, and you can see the truth in the powerful information that we've presented on ACEs and the potential impact on health as we've been presenting today, be encouraged that there is hope. There are ways to address this, and people are getting incredible health turnarounds as they start to apply some of the techniques we've discussed. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Isaiah 40:41.
So in terms of autoimmunity, we know that most autoimmune diseases, it's a female dominant illness, so it's mostly females that get autoimmune diseases. And the interesting thing is the correlation of ACEs for women and onset of autoimmunity is as strongly correlated as smoking is for lung cancer. So what's very interesting when we actually start looking at case studies and when people start recovering from emotional trauma and they start recovering their health again, what's interesting is when we start to clear our emotions and resolve emotional trauma, what you'll see in patients is like it's a total transformation. So it's not just that they are transforming their body and their physical body's changing. When somebody's also dealing with the emotional component, they are not the same person they were before they got ill. And what I'll hear all the time with my patients and my clients is they'll say to me, I can't be well and be the old person that I was because I'll just get sick again. So it's almost the illness itself is almost a call to transformation, and it's requiring not just cure but healing. So often you can see that somebody maybe has been cured for an illness but they didn't really heal, which means they didn't heal the emotional trauma side. But you can be healed, you can resolve the emotional trauma and may not have a complete cure, but the healing has caused you to be very happy, well integrated, living a happy and very fulfilled life, even if you haven't got full functionality back. So when somebody, I often see this with my patients, when they've done a really deep healing, they will be a different person. They'll feel different inside. And the process of healing isn't just a change in, say, diet and lifestyle and sort of behavioral aspects like exercise. Their passions and interests may have changed. Who they hang out with has often changed. The focus of their job focus changes. So I had one patient, for example, who used to be a CEO of a bank. It was an investment bank in London, and he got severely ill and couldn't work anymore. And he was very dedicated to recovery, and he kind of turned into this kind of vegetable juicing guy that eventually actually wanted to go on and become a practitioner. And it was a total transformation. And it's often interesting when somebody is changing and they're also changing their emotional state through this recovery. When they've come to the end of it and they've recovered, you'll know that healing's occurred, because quite often the person will even say the illness was the best thing that ever happened to them. So one of the most powerful sort of case study stories that I can share was actually my own business partner, Alex, who was very sick with chronic fatigue all during his teens, and he spent 7 years housebound, 2 years at that time bedbound. And he had been doing everything under the sun with diet. He had done, detox regimes, he'd gone vegetarian, he'd gone to high protein, he'd done just about everything that you could do on the physical side. He'd done enemas, he'd just done everything, an anti-candida diet, and he'd really exhausted all of that. And it was one day, it was actually his uncle that helped him come to realize this, but it was one day where he realized that it was down to him. It was going to be down to him. So he'd been to see so many other practitioners, my body doesn't work, please can you fix it? And it was the day that he realized that it was in his control, and that it was his attitude and what he was going to do in terms of taking responsibility for himself, which is actually very empowering, and a recognition that his psychology was playing a tremendous part in his recovery. So he had to look back at some of his own very difficult childhood experiences and see how that had created a lot of trauma and anxiety and sort of mental patterns that actually turned out to be prolonging the illness. So this constant kind of focus on the symptoms that he had and getting into a kind of mental state of anxiety was keeping him in that sort of denial resistant stage, and he was staying in this sympathetic nervous system stress. So it was actually the brain and the psychological symptoms that he hadn't addressed yet. So there was two realizations. One is that he was going to ultimately heal himself, which is always true for all our clients and patients. It's never us that fixes them. It's their commitment to a statement of intention they can make about, I am going to heal this, I am going to experience and have the body and the experience that I know I deserve and want, and that he was going to be the trigger that initiated that. So that might mean transitioning through some more physical therapy, but also that he was acknowledging and taking into account his own psychology, and acknowledged that the psychology side was playing a major part in the proliferation of his symptoms. It was sort of the last element that he picked up on, and he actually learnt a neuro-linguistic programming, an NLP technique that was what you could call a kind of stop technique. And every time he noticed that he was focusing on his symptoms, which by the way proliferates them, keeps you in a mental state of anxiety, and this constant sort of response to symptoms, which is how do I get better? What do I need to do about this? And it was in a chronic state of anxiety about it all the time. When he learnt a stop technique, which is an NLP process, where essentially he was pulling his brain out of this sympathetic nervous system response, and he was reconditioning the brain back into a calm, trusting, balanced state. That's what was the last trigger for him, and it was what his body needed to recover, because if the body is in a chronic state of stress, it's not in a healing state. And if somebody is constantly in that sympathetic stress state, it can't heal itself. So this was another aspect of how psychology comes in, and that was his response to being ill. And when he took responsibility for that, that's what triggered the recovery. And he is somebody who was, went on, and Alex actually was the founder of the Optimum Health Clinic, which is one of the largest mind-body clinics in the UK. Eventually that clinic I co-founded with him was published in the British Medical Journal Open, and it's becoming, our aim is for it to be some of the treatment standards for all other people with chronic fatigue syndrome, and hopefully it will become part of the NHS standard treatments. And since then, Alex has gone on and done all kinds of things, like made documentary films, an online platform. He's done amazing things. So this is one example of how the psychology can be so important in parts of recovery. And it might mean there's different aspects of psychology. It can be the present moment of the type of trauma or the mental patterns that you're playing out, or it can be trauma in the past and how that's influenced your beliefs, behavior, and so on, and your identity levels. So if you are somebody who right now you're dealing with a chronic illness or an ailment, my advice to you is, ultimately the body knows how to heal itself. And, if you, with the right support and the right awareness and understanding that there's physical components and there's also emotional components, by addressing that and with the right support, recovery is possible, and never give up.
With the world that we're in today, seeing the amount of disease that we're all exposed to, seeing that 1 in 3 seniors are dying with Alzheimer's, 1 in 3 seniors are dying with dementia. These are horrifying diseases, perhaps some of the diseases we're most afraid of, because losing a sense of who you are is tremendously frightening, and the effect on your loved ones, for those of us that have witnessed this type of thing, it is truly a terrifying thing. Now, in terms of maintaining our mind, our body, our soul, I'm just so grateful that we do have principles to live by that can prevent these things, and even principles that we've even seen in this documentary that can be used to turn back the clock even when we start to see these things happen or have a progression of the disease of Alzheimer's even. Wow. And I think that that's something that we can all walk away with a tremendous amount of hope. And looking at the fact that we can turn back the clock on some of these really debilitating diseases, things that the modern medical field say are lost cases in the majority of cases. I mean, I've seen that time and time again. But yet the Bible says, no, it's not that way with you. These are not lost cases. That is not true. What is true is that you can turn things around. And I do believe that's all part of the forgiving God that we serve. When God made us, He made us in His image. He created our bodies and gave them this tremendous capacity to forgive us for the wrongs that we've done to it, both in this world and things that we've inflicted upon our bodies. And when you see that and you understand my body can turn things around, then you have hope. That hope is well-founded. And that is why you can see the stories through this whole documentary series of all these people that have trusted that the body can heal itself. And that is something that you can truly proclaim loud and clear the more and more I believe that you understand that God is in fact the author of your body, and it is intelligently designed. It is not in a state of chaos. It was ordained by God the way that it is, and our bodies are disease-fighting machines, because disease is not something that God programmed into the design of His masterpiece. Just like an artist would not set termites to eat away the painting, or any other craftsman would never want anything to destroy that thing, let alone a creator that had designed these bodies and an intelligent human life. And then disease is an enemy, and God set up every provision within our bodies to fight that disease. It's up to us to claim those promises and implement it with the way that we treat our body, and that we start to treat it as the temple of the Holy Spirit, a place that God can live in. So let's start doing the right things for our body today. Let's turn the clock. Let's use faith to deal with things like trauma and the pain that's been inflicted on us, so we have the ability to forgive, because we know that God has forgiven us and that God will deal with these things. He is God. We are not. He will deal with injustices that have been done to us. He will deal with these things. But us, it's for us to let it go. It's for us to let it go, just like a young girl that was a victim of being a child soldier, who I met personally in Uganda under a prolific a ringleader there, and she said something in regard. She was forced to do horrific things, and this child, she said, if you get bit by a snake, what do? Can you chase that snake to kill it? Is that what you do when you've just been hit? You got the venom of the snake? No, you can't afford to do that. If you do that, you'll die. But if you go to look for the antidote, then you can survive, then you can live. You've got to forgive. You've got to let that part go, because otherwise you'll never heal. God, I believe, gives us the ability to do that. And that's what I want to really emphasize in this entire series. You'll see that time and time again, God can give us the power to resolve and to clear our trauma, to forgive ourselves. I should have done this. I should have done that. I can't believe. And the beating up that we do on ourselves, these things are actually disease-causing mechanisms. We've proven it. The negative thinking, the stress, the fear, these are like praying for things that we don't want. Let's let it go. Let's give our lives to God and put ourselves in His hands and choose to have peace in our life, the peace that passes understanding, the peace that came from the gift of Calvary. So thank you for sharing your journey with us as you've come along this ride. Thank you for being here. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in the next episode, going on this journey further with you and exploring other aspects of the Bible, health, healing, faith, and the tremendous things that our bodies can do when we allow them to. In the next episode, we're going to look at autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease is taking the livelihood of over 70 million Americans and hundreds of millions of people across the world. And autoimmunity does take away the quality of life for so many people. Multiple sclerosis, lupus, arthritis. And there's a class of over 80 autoimmune diseases, and yet they all surface and have different debilitating symptoms. But they do have one solution. I believe that one solution is found in the Bible. So we're going to find that out in this next upcoming episode. Now, if you've enjoyed this series, if this has been a blessing to you, then I just want to make the encouragement to you to own this series so you can take it with you, you can share it with your friends, your family, and continue to go on this journey and implement the things you've learned. We've got lots of exciting things in the package that you can check out below, the Bible Health Secrets special package that we're offering during this free screening for a special price, because we want you to have that. We want you to be able to take that away. It's fully covered by a money-back guarantee, no questions asked, so you can make the decision now and try it, see if you're fully satisfied. But what's important about this package is that it allows you to continue on your journey. We've got a guidebook set up with notes and the scriptural references so you can follow along and go back through the episodes and track through with the transcripts as you'll have the 7 episodes, and you'll have the director's cut of that, so extended episodes with content that you didn't see in this version that is currently running. And then also you'll get the 40+ expert interviews, so you can watch the entire interview. A lot of these interviews went for an entire hour, and so you'll find that 90% of the content is in these interviews, and so you can find your favorite experts, listen to their interviews, and gain so much hard-won wisdom, things that you'd fly around the whole country and try to consult with all these doctors and be super expensive. But when you own this series, you're actually supporting our mission, but you're also supporting the work that we do throughout the world in alleviating suffering, as we donate a large portion of the proceeds to charity. And the Bible speaks about the importance of caring for the poor. In fact, in Isaiah 58, it says it has a direct bearing on our health of all things, right? It says, if you shall clothe the naked, if you feed the hungry, then shall I make your health spring forth speedily, and you shall break forth as the dawn. it talks about us actually having a revitalization of our own body when we give back and care for others. And isn't that an incredible society, a society that you want to live in, right? Where we work to get ourselves better, but our intent, our care is on other people. And that's what I committed to do in creating this series. So we'd stay focused on those that are worse off than ourselves. And that's why we're focusing on Eyes for India, people that can't see, that are blind in India, and famine relief in Kenya, restoring and giving life back to people that are starving and their families are suffering, people that have witnessed the horrors that I've seen out there. And the truth is there's a huge amount of difference that can be made with what would be comparatively just a little bit of money and what it can do in these countries to help turn people's lives around and help provide them with what they need to create a better future for themselves. So if you'd like to own this series, to continue your health journey and your knowledge of the Bible truths and the scriptures and how you can change your health, then all you need to do is just click the link below so you can own your package today and move forward. I'm sure you're really excited about the next episode. I look forward to seeing you there.